Okay, what happened 100,000 years ago when we're out hunter-gathering throughout the savannas?
Yes.
Did we nose breathe then?
Yes.
And
Yes.
how do we know that, and what would have made us more likely to nose breathe?
We know by the shape of the face.
Okay. And just so people understand, literally the shape of your entire cranium, facial,
Yes.
jaw changes as a child if you don't breathe right.
Absolutely. And 60% of the growth of the face is achieved by 4 years of age. So we have a very brief window of opportunity there. 90% of the growth of the face is achieved by 12 years of age. So if you were to look at a study that came out on Neanderthals about 2 years ago, the researchers identified that they had really wide facial structures. They had very large nostrils, and the researchers put down the large nostrils, not just because they were nasal breathing during rest, but they were nasal breathing during physical exercise. Professor John Mew, he's based here in London. He's also an anthropologist. He was also trained as an orthodontic surgeon. He's an orthodontist, and he's 90 years of age now. And he writes about 400 years ago here in the UK, when they unearthed bodies from graves from upper middle class background, people who had access to sugar. They noticed that the craniofacial development was much poorer. In other words, they had narrow facial structures, jaws that were set back, and they had overcrowding of teeth. If you go into any natural history museum, you don't see overcrowding of teeth. Crooked teeth are a problem. And it's not just an aesthetic problem, but it's an airway problem. Because the vast majority of kids who breathe through their open mouth, they will develop crooked teeth. And the reason that they have crooked teeth is because they don't have the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. Now, I know traditional orthodontists will probably say that it's down to genetics. It's not down to genetics. This has changed remarkably in the last 50 to 100 years. We don't even have to go back 100,000 years ago. You know, whether
it's because of sugar?
I think diet has been one aspect of it.
Because something triggered it, right?
Yes.
Because it's not like the hunter-gatherers knew to walk around and they didn't have any tape.
Yes.
And they probably didn't say, we know nasal breathing is the right way.
Yes.
Although maybe it was a meme, maybe they would watch people and maybe it was something everyone did and they just did it without thinking about it. But
Yes.
what would trigger people?
There's a number of things to it. One is tongue tie. So for instance, midwives in 16th century France, when the infant was born, they used to open up the baby's mouth and just check the string that holds the tongue to the floor of the mouth. And if it was too tight, they had an extra long fingernail, they just clipped it. And the reason they did that was because they wanted the tongue to move freely in the mouth, because the tongue was necessary for breastfeeding. If their tongue was stuck to the floor of the mouth, that child couldn't breastfeed, the child wouldn't thrive, and back in the 16th century, the child would probably die. So human beings, we've seen interventions like this throughout. And if you look at a book written back in the 1870s called Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life by an American painter called George Catlin, he went and spent time with the North American Indians because he thought their traditions were dying out. So as an artist, he wanted to chronicle this. He wrote about the Native Americans, where every time that the baby had the lips apart, the mother would go over to the baby and press the lips together. And he also spoke about the European settlers, kids coming over, adults coming over, sleeping on their backs, mouth open, just breathing hard. So, you know, it's always being there. And I think food, especially we're eating very soft food now, which is not developing the muscles of the face, lack of breastfeeding. And I know, listen, I'm not blaming mothers here. Society has forced mothers to work because we're all up to our debt, you know, all up to our neck in mortgages. So I really understand that the significance that the mom is often pressurized to go back into work to make sure that the family home is paid for. But breastfeeding is really important, not just for nutrition, because it's breastfeeding that develops the muscles. It develops the muscles of the face, so the baby has good muscle tone. And with this, then that the baby is more likely to restore nasal breathing. So there's probably not just one factor, and you can't isolate which factors cause mouth breathing and which don't, but it can be addressed, and that's the key.
All right, so this is, I mean, you just shot a big old cannonball across the bow of the world and said, wait a second, a lot of our problems could be because our children and we are breathing through our mouths and not our noses. And that can affect, like you said, when you talk about your case, it's a great point. So again, you've got all of this, inflammation happening in your lungs, going to your nose, then you're lacking of sleep, you have anxiety, you send that kid into school, and now you've got a dysfunctional student.
Yes.
And now that can ruin lives.
Totally.
And this can also self-fulfill and continue.
Yes.